So I'm going to ask you first to introduce yourself. Some of you are representing organizations. Then I'll mention some organizations that are not here. So first, let's just go around the panel and you each introduce yourself. And if you're representing an organization, you can mention that as well.
Should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
In English, right?
This one, if you want, you can do, well, yeah, do it in English.
Okay. But maybe the personal part I do in German. The first part. Ja, hallo nochmal. Ich sage vielleicht noch mal kurz was Persönliches zu mir. Ich habe es ja angedeutet, meine Kinder sind jetzt 15 und 8 Jahre alt. Wie bin ich überhaupt dazu gekommen? Das ist ja jetzt schon relativ alt in Anführungszeichen, also Teenager, meine Tochter. Ich habe es vorhin angedeutet, ich habe länger in den USA gelebt und ja, das Thema hat viel mit Vorbildern zu tun und ich habe dort halt in Kalifornien Familien kennengelernt, also Same-Sex-Families kennengelernt, die über Adoption oder andere Wege Kinder eben bekommen haben und bin dann mit dieser Idee wieder nach Deutschland zurückgekommen und das ist jetzt schon ein paar Jährchen her, also das war halt bevor meine Tochter geboren wurde und bin dann in diesen Prozess rein und habe mich halt damit beschäftigt, wie geht das in Deutschland und bin so dann auch auf Surrogacy gekommen. Das war noch bevor es Men Having Babies gab und ja, also so ist es dann dazu gekommen, dass wir eben diese 2 Kinder bekommen haben. Maybe now I switch to English. In 2017 I started this group association, VFLLD. And this is now the political part of the equation because I wanted to basically have people talk about surrogacy in Germany because there was kind of this information void. I always say it was almost like North Korea, you know, in terms of surrogacy in Germany. You couldn't talk about it, and that's why we didn't have those events like this in a long time in Germany. And our group became a little bit, I wouldn't say famous, but it became known. And part of it also was that our founding members, they went on television. Me personally, I produced a television documentary in 2016. So there was a lot of interest in society on this topic because until then, nobody spoke about it, or if it was spoken about, it was in terms of sort of dramatizing the situation, and it was kind of like when things don't work well. You know, this India example you may have heard about, and other examples. And so yeah, once we had this association started, we were suddenly taken seriously, and in fact. Last year, this intention in Germany to change egg donation and surrogacy and to make it more flexible was actually written, and many of you know this maybe, was written in the coalition contract. And so what is the status? I mean, the coalition contract of the government that's in power now, not too far from here. And of course, they haven't done anything yet because they have dealt with other topics like inflation and environment and those types of things. But it is written in the coalition contract, and the commission actually that they wanted to start is in place now. Has been in place for the last 2 weeks, so not very long. And they have met, of course, but hopefully, you know, eventually this will happen. Yeah. So this is basically
we might go back.
We go back to the topics, but this is where we stand. Yes. Welcome again, and nice to meet you all.
Guten Abend, Berlin. I'm going to talk in English because I'm Dutch and I don't speak that well German, so Entschuldigung. My name is Sjors Veenendaal, and together with my husband we have 2 children. We started this process over 10 years ago. Dealt with a lot of bumps in the road and also did an adoption route and also foster care. Also informed ourselves in surrogacy in Canada twice. But fortunately we have 2 children thanks to 2 local traditional surrogates. And indeed, and I agree to Sarah, it is about relationships. And I think everyone I speak about surrogacy, it is fundamental about relationships, whether it is between an ocean or not. I think that's a foundation. I'm a board member of Stichting Meer dan Gewenst, more than wished for, translated. And I have an own practice as a counselor in my own practice around surrogacy, domestic but also abroad. And I'm a medical social worker in a fertility clinic, and I do a lot of things around that. Next to my family, of course. I also wrote a book and a children's book to inform everyone about our process, but also giving children the tools, talking about it, or parents talking about this process with their children, or explaining it for indeed the schools or friends or whatever, to make a narrative for children. Well, that's my personal story, in short. Meer dan Gewenst, More Than Wished For is a Dutch foundation. We founded over 25 years ago. And I think one of the main things we do is to educate people, to educate intended parents from the LGBTQIA+ rainbow families about options and giving advice what to do and what not to do. We organize a lot of information meetings about different family forms, such as surrogacy, but also about donor conception, foster care, adoption, and multi-parenthood or polyparenthood. And I think it's also important what we do is that we connect intended parents to each other, but also to experienced parents, just to get more information about what the possibilities are. What we also do is lobby a lot in the politics. So we have been taking a lot more serious the past couple of years, and I think that's a really good thing, a very good development, that we are invited right now by the government to talk about new legislation. And I think that's a very good and positive development that we're going through. We also participate in a lot of scientific research, because I also think that's very important in the political lobby. If you can say, well, scientific research shows that it's okay, that you win the lobby, I think. We are a lot more in the media. I think 10 years ago, when we started, the only thing we thought is, well, we're two men, we love each other, we'd like to have a family, let's adopt. But then there were a lot of other options through research, and I think what we see is that more and more people are informed on forehand about surrogacy, about donor conception, about polyparenthood. And I think that's also kind of what we're going to talk about, the mindset. That's also changed a couple of years ago. So we are very much visible in the media, and I think also that's a great development. And what we also do, and I think that's from my perspective also a good thing, is that we collaborate a lot with other organizations, such as COC, that's a local LGBT group, but also Zwanger voor een ander, Pregnant for Another. That's there's the board member over there, very welcome in Berlin. That's a Dutch foundation for surrogacy. So, and a lot of other specialized foundations, and I think together you're a lot stronger than when you participate as a non-profit organization alone. And I think our goal is that, just as Men Having Babies is, to let people make well-informed, well-thought-of and felt decisions in a legal, medical, psychological, social, but also an ethical way. And I think that's the goal that we have, and I'm looking forward to this weekend, and thanks for having me.
Shall I introduce myself in German or English?
You said you can speak in English, so I didn't bring my headset. So.
Okay, all right. So, my name is Annika König. You see my affiliation up there. So I'm a senior researcher at FU Berlin. And I've been doing research on surrogacy for 10 years now, actually. And as a medical anthropologist, my approach to this kind of research is to do like in-depth ethnographic research. So I don't do quantitative research, so I don't count numbers or something, but I really collect the stories and experiences of people who do surrogacy. And my starting point, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in my presentation, was to begin with intended parents in the German-speaking region, so Germany and Switzerland mostly, and follow them around the world where they go, and then also talk to their surrogates, their lawyers, their fertility doctors, and in Germany also to registrars and lawyers and so on. So I've been doing this for, as I just said, 10 years, and I think we all have made that observation that 10 years ago it was really, really difficult to find people who were even willing to talk about their experiences. So I actually looked for people for more than half a year, and I thought I just couldn't do the project until I finally found one couple. And from there, it was like a snowballing effect, because that went really well, and then they recommended other intended parents to me. But at that time, it was really like super secretive, so there were like closed discussion groups online, and there were like several steps of like checking out who people were and if they really were who they claimed they would be, to even get into the forums and stuff. So there was literally nobody talking about it, and I think everyone here can probably confirm that. And this has changed a lot, so I'm sort of mainly collecting the stories and experiences of people, but I'm also, of course, looking at, the development of surrogacy through time. And at the moment, I'm hopefully soon finalizing a book on this. And I just look forward to your questions, and I will be around after this. So if anyone wants to know more about my research or about, research in general, you can always just come up and talk to me.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael. I am a dad to 3 kids through surrogacy. I didn't have triplets. We had a son, and then our second journey, our embryo split, so we had twins, identical twins. I've been in the surrogacy community for 6 years now. And I'm coming here just to talk about, I would say, the negative things we're seeing socially and politically in countries like Spain, for example. Because what happens in other European countries will start to reflect on other European countries, right? So I'm just here to talk about this. I'm not representing any association or organization. I'm just here to talk about that and what we're seeing and what we're doing to, change that. Okay, and that's it. Very short.
My name is Dr. Lise Regula. Along with being the new advocacy associate here at Men Having Babies, I am also a faculty member who teaches biology and human anatomy at the University of Dayton in Ohio. I come to this space as a trans guy who has also been an egg donor 3 times prior to transition and a surrogate twice prior to transition. Part of my interest in what Men Having Babies does is my interest in breaking down barriers. I imagine that nearly all of us in this room have some experience with breaking down barriers, whether that is getting over our own fear and shame over coming out, whether that is guilt as a kid over breaking a piece of glassware, whatever. Most of us also probably have some experience breaking down systemic barriers, and that's really what we're here for today. Unfortunately, what we tend to see is with more barriers to anything, whether that's marrying who you want, building a family in the way you want, the more barriers we build through systems that hurt people and other people, the more shame gets built into that system and the more damaging those systems are. So if we can break away some of those barriers, if we can make things a little bit more accessible so that we can actually talk about people's experiences, so that we can actually get things out in the open, then it's a lot more easy to not just engage in behaviors that humans are going to do and have been doing for centuries, but to do that in a way that is not harmful to us or to someone else. The LGBTQ community has been around as long as the human community has been. People have been doing surrogacy for probably as long as humans have been around as well. We're at a point today where we can talk about how do we do that better. And that's what this weekend is about.
And just before we dive into some of the conversation, I want to mention that we have other associations and social groups that are partnering and helping, with the various objectives or missions we have. Shiro's already mentions Zvia. I don't know how to, I don't say the full name very well. So Pauline here, if you want, you can get up and introduce yourself. Is a terrific partner. Some of the countries in Europe have organizations that are more rainbow family associations. Some have organizations like VFLD that is de facto, very gay, but more organized around, the concept of talking about surrogacy and the path towards legislating domestic surrogacy. So in the Netherlands, we have both. And there are associations that they're going to have people here throughout the weekend that are not necessarily here, but there is, I think Nir might be here, Nir Tjomkin from Männer kriegen Kinder, did I say it right? MKK, otherwise known. It's a social group here in Berlin for men who have had children through surrogacy, as some of you recognizing what I was trying to say in German. Please, he'll be around and people will be able to find those groups also on Facebook. They're linked. We have people either here or coming tomorrow from also other countries, from Switzerland, from the Rainbow Family Association there, from Belgium, Homoparentalité, and APGL from France, organizations that are sometimes typically more represented in our Brussels conference, but also we have people here from all those countries, including members of these associations. And this discourse we're going to start today, at least some of us are going to continue tomorrow in a group setting because we want to try to advance those discussions, those insights, what we learn from each other from one conference to the next. And Liz, you just mentioned already the fact that this is about not, whether surrogacy exists or doesn't exist, whether gay men exist or don't, but really about the fact that we're privileged to be able to move to the more mindful, intentional phase where we are talking about how is this acceptable, under which terms. So maybe, and this also, we've known each other for a while, and was part when we created our ethical framework, when we started articulating what is it that we think are the parameters that make surrogacy good. I mean, we always felt that surrogacy, the people who started Men Having Babies at least, we felt that our experience was amazing. That we didn't feel that we did anything wrong. We didn't feel that the surrogates have been in any way harmed, that their kids, our kids are in any way screwed up. But we had to at some point sit and articulate it, because just feeling it in your guts is not enough. And when you start thinking about it, you think about a lot of things that maybe you haven't thought before. Sometimes you might change your mind. But we just really were able to realize that it takes some work to dive into these issues, and to doing that, we needed different perspectives. And one of the perspectives was of the surrogate, and Lise was very active in that group. So Lise, why don't you talk to us about, people do have objections about surrogacy nowadays. We know that. What are the various parameters that we take into consideration, including those social attitudes, and without getting into, of course, discussing the details of the ethical guidelines, some of which will come across this evening, I'm sure, anyhow. Just what are, the topics that those guidelines address?
So in order to do anything ethically, there are a number of things that have to come into play. First and foremost, like people have highlighted already, surrogacy is a relationship. None of us would go into a relationship with a romantic partner, say, coming from the view of, you're less than me, you are uneducated, you're being coerced into this. If we are going into that relationship with that view, that's probably not going to be a healthy relationship. And if we're addressing surrogates in a similar way, viewing them through a lens of stigma, bias, and negative stereotypes that have been built up through some really bad press at times, and just sometimes some of those broken systems. If we're coming to a surrogacy relationship with that view of the other party, that's not going to be a healthy relationship either. So having trust, having respect for the other parties who are involved are extremely important. It's also important to recognize the autonomy of the other individual. If we are trying to impose our will on someone else, yeah, that's not a good space. It's not only going to potentially hurt them, it's going to hurt us, because at some point we're going to recognize that, oh crap, I really shouldn't have pushed that hard on this issue. It wasn't as big a deal as I thought. And I just made a giant jerk of myself. So recognizing that autonomy of the other person, it's not easy. Like was mentioned earlier, we all like to have control, or at least think that we have control of a situation. And pregnancy, whether it's surrogate pregnancy or not, pregnancy is a situation where there's a lot of loss of control. There are things that are totally up to chance, unfortunately. And sometimes chance doesn't go our way. And being able to respect and not blame someone else when, that was chance, that particular implantation didn't take, it was a failed transfer. That's it. I don't have to scrutinize, well, what did you eat that day? Did you do this? Because we've already built a trusting relationship, and whether that's with the surrogate themselves or in the case of an agency surrogacy, that might be a matter of, I trust these people who have picked someone who is working with me and screened that person and in a good space. So trust, respect, autonomy, all extremely critical. And legality. If we want to do something well, laws can either hinder or help the process. Here in the EU is a very different legal situation than where I am from in the US. I'm actually privileged in a sense because I understood the concept of surrogacy. It was talked about in my family before I understood the language to express who I was within the LGBTQ community. I grew up with a mom who talked about pregnancy was easy for her. She absolutely loved it. She felt like it was a great thing. She just didn't want to parent any more than 2 kids. We were a handful, I'll admit it. So those laws that are put in place for a reason, people have their views and they think they're doing the right thing, but those laws make it more difficult for people in this instance, because it does mean that people are going to do surrogacy. They're just not going to do it here, or have the surrogate here, which is going to necessitate some travel. It's going to be harder to build a relationship. And some people are going to choose to do it here anyway because, yeah, we're humans. We break laws sometimes, some of us. And then you've just put that family who is just trying to build a family at serious legal risk And obviously, I'm not advocating, don't break laws. We all want to be upright, upstanding citizens. People do what they're going to do. But you've just put a family at risk. Just through the fact that they were trying to build a family and do something that many people take for granted and often happens totally by accident, which is also something that can be really damaging.
And unfortunately, there's just been an incident in Spain of a couple that was found to have done surrogacy in a, as it turns out, not just illegal, but very irresponsible way, given that they didn't have the support and the structure and the guidelines that would have been something that would have required it to do in a legal framework that is permissible. So our ethical framework started with understanding we need to look at the situation across, of course, many different countries, and a lot of it reflects the situation that we feel is very much the reality in the United States and Canada. A lot of it, some of it are things that we wish would have been better in those countries as well. For instance, we think that it would be ideal if the agencies that are part of this process are not-for-profit organizations. You in Europe would have the opportunity, and we think that even surrogate compensation should be regulated. And we'll talk about surrogate compensation at some point. But the reality is that the major thing that's happening here is that the United States, Canada, to some extent, the United Kingdom, have a different political philosophy or foundations such that, to some extent, if something doesn't hurt other people, then the perception is that the government shouldn't bother with it. In the United States, obviously they were bothered by us for many years for being gay, even though it had absolutely nothing to do with some sort of a societal, cost. But for the most part, this is why people were able to adopt in the United States much earlier than they were able to, gay people, than they were here. Because in order to stop that, somebody would have had to come up with an explicit law and persuade enough people that this is something that society should worry about. So the political environment in Europe is such that there is an assumption that the state is the arbiter that says about everything we do. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it good? Is it bad? A more paternalistic view of now, when it comes to some social, support and protections, et cetera, that's great. Everybody agrees, for the most part in Europe, that healthcare is a human right, which is not the case in the United States. But when it comes to something like surrogacy, that very, 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 I could say that many times, few people understand what it is. Very, 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 very few people ever saw surrogacy, got to meet somebody that wanted the help of a surrogate or the surrogate itself. When the state has to make a decision about that, then, a lot of things ensue that are what we're seeing right now, and we'll talk about it in Italy and Spain, etc. So a very fundamental part of our ethical framework is that it has to be based on research. It has to be based on what we can learn. Because what we want is we want to understand what are the outcomes, what are the results of surrogacy. Does it hurt somebody? Does it hurt the well-being of people medically and mentally? So that's a very first rule in our ethical framework. How you minimize medical risks and how you make sure that you are doing it in a way that would not harm the people involved. Therefore, they need to be protected legally. They need to be well-informed. They need to have the ability to make decisions based on as much information as possible. And there needs to be some people who say, I would love to do that. It's my right to do it. And you say, no, you can't do that because you put your life too much at risk. Because this is about potential, life-threatening, conditions. So it's not just about letting everybody do what they want. It's not because we want to be parents so strongly that who cares? We don't believe that the end justifies the means. But we do think that there could be ways, and we've seen it over many, many years, where the well-being of everybody is protected, the rights of everybody is protected, the outcomes are studied and are shown to be beneficial to everybody to the degree that we feel comfortable with that.